the screen hold on, let me just take a moment. Screen okay, that's fine. Okay, good evening everyone. That's fine, that's good. Good evening everyone. So today's lecture is going to be about respiratory system anatomy, and it's an important topic, as Dr. Alimi said, because it's going to prepare you better for the for grasping the concept of physiology and pathologies of lung in the future lectures. So yeah, we're going to start with just an introduction of the respiratory system. So the respiratory system, it facilitates gas exchange. Oxygen in the air is inhaled and it makes its way through the pharynx and then into the larynx and then into the trachea, as you can see, large upper airways, conducting bronchioles, respiratory bronchioles, the alveoli, and then finally the capillaries to be sent to the body's tissues. And then carbon dioxide is, it makes then the reverse journey to eventually be exhaled into the outside world. So we're gonna discuss about each section in more detail in the future slides. Yeah, so the rib cage, it helps and protect the organs in the chest, such as the heart, the lung, from damage, and it consists of 12 pairs of bones, or you can say of ribs that form the main part of the thoracic cage. So this whole thing is the thoracic cage, or you can call it the chest wall, and it extends from the vertebrae towards the sternum. It increases the anterior, posterior, and transverse diameters of the thorax by their movements. And we have got true ribs, then we have got false ribs, and then also you've got floating ribs. So the true ribs, these are the first 7 ribs that are attached to the sternum by their costal cartilages, and they provide structure, strength, and flexibility to the rib cage. And then you've got the, let me just mute everyone first. Okay. Good. And then you have got the false ribs, which is considered false because they do not directly attach to the sternum. Yes?
Yeah, Dr. Step Purple. If you a little bit slowly move on. So as mostly students are weak in English, if you go fast, they will be unable to understand.
Sure. I will slow down the Pashto can explain Koma. So I will English explain Koma, and then I will also explain in Pashto as well. Yes, sorry, I will slow down. Okay, false ribs, they're considered false because they only attach to the sternum, these sections, through the combined costal cartilages with the costal cartilage of the 7th rib. And then you've got the floating ribs, as I mentioned, and these are the last 2 ribs, so rib 11 and 12, and they're connected only to the vertebrae and not to the sternum. So rib da chida da, rib cage da, or da zumunga, thorax organs chidi da bones da, like a heart show, like a lung show, aga protect kay, aga cover kay, and aga damage na sati. So now da zamung rib cage da the doulas ribs na consist gigi chari ke, or da ribs cage da obviously breathing movement ki zumunga exhalation and inspiration ke, inhalation ke ari ke dir ko makke mung sara chitaus da future lectures ke the concept more clear kigi. So the rib 1 natar rib 7 puri cheda da gazi natar da gazi puri data munga true ribs wayu or da the true ribs zaka chedi directly chedi kana sternum ta attachments lari kata so gori the directly sternum ta attach the bal pake false ribs chedi aga the sanarazi. يعني the أتمنى تردول simply the false ribs way. No, excluding the 11th and 12th, the false ribs chidi kana like 8 show, 9 show, 10 show. They do indirectly the sternum to attachments form. Ki first they do combined costal cartilages chidi. They do 7th rib to attach kigi, but the 7th rib through they do sternum to attach kigi, and then the 11th show, and then beda dola some rib show. Do the attachment nilary sternum that do khali the vertebral column to the arit attachment lari. And then this is this structure you can see here, the sternum. The sternum is a flat bone. The manubrum, this is composed of manubrum, the section, the sternal angle, the body of the sternum. This area is the body of the sternum, and then the xiphoid process. And the sternum cheda دا اصل کې په فیمیلز کې چې دا هغې کې دا شورت ده یعنې وړوکې ده سایز او لږ نری غوندې هم ده په فیمیلز کې نسبت د میلز نه. and یو بل interesting concept د sternum دا ده چې کله just out of topic چې کله cardiac surgery کیږي open cardiac surgery چې کله کیږي دا sternum چې دا هغه surgeons دغسې د میز نه څه کوي داسې قطع کوي د میز نه نیم کوي in order to like have an access to the heart and to the lung regions and then so دا غوی د وکولی شي چې دا rib cage داسې ایله کي and then Rusta after the surgery they will then wire these the sternum together, so it's a important it was just interesting, so I thought I'll mention it. Okay, so yeah, and then we're going to move on to intercostal muscles. Intercostal muscles they lie beneath the large extrinsic muscles of the thoracic wall and so the one that they lie beneath the extrinsic muscles and the intercostal muscles. These are composed of the external intercostal muscles, the internal and the innermost, and they are basically divided into three groups because they going from the superficial to deep muscles. So the superficial one, the outer layer is the external, then is the external intercostal muscle, the internal intercostal muscle, and then beneath that is the innermost intercostal muscles. And these muscles are located within the intercostal spaces, as you can see, and they also function to elevate, stabilize, and also to depress the thoracic cage. So this whole thing is, this can be called the thoracic cage, the rib cage, or the chest wall. And therefore, they facilitate with breathing movements as well. Specifically, the external intercostal muscles, they facilitate with forced inspiration, so forced inhalation, and the internal or the innermost intercostal muscles, they aid with forced expiration. So, the intercostal muscles, which these ones, they do cover the intercostal spaces between the ribs. So there are three groups: the outer layer, the external intercostal way, but the external intercostal landicum layer, internal intercostal muscle way, or the innermost layer, data internal, the internal intercostal muscle that beneath razi danana agita be innermost internal intercostal muscle way. Or the role hamded important the breathing ke like inhalation ke and exhalation ke or the kumaki zumunga thoracic cage sara daga zumunga thoracic cage sara che aga saki aga stabilize ki. So specifically the external intercostal chidikana we facilitate forced inspiration matlab yani kala chimunga breathe in ko kala chimunga and breathe in ko, whereas the internal intercostal chidikana the expirations that are involved. This is the internal wala the exhalations that are involved, the exhalation facilitate whereas the external chidi do inhalation inspiration hum inhalation facilitate so the involvement ziyatara inhalation process keda or the internal chida the ziyatara process function chida aga exhalation the involvement ziyatara da. And then we have also the diaphragm, the dome shaped the diaphragm that's the muscle, the big dome shaped muscle da, and it makes up the floor of the thorax, and that the thorax is and they obviously they role hump inhalation exhalation kide or the concept there clear ki kalache the physiology ke the inspiration and exhalation concept of the alta explain she, and then so this is just an introduction to this, but this will be explained in more detail in future lectures. So moving on to the trachea, so this region here. So trachea, it begins at the inferior border of the cricoid cartilage, as you can see at the inferior border of this, and it's a continuation of the larynx, and it ends by bifurcating into the right and the left main stem bronchi at the level of the sternal angle. And it's approximately 12 centimeter in length, has around 16 to 12 incomplete hyaline cartilages, these ones, cartilaginous rings that open posteriorly towards the esophagus, and they prevent the trachea from collapsing. And also they may be compressed by the aortic arch aneurysms, as we explained in the previous lecture of aneurysm, that they can actually lead to compression of the trachea. They can also be compressed by the goiter or thyroid tumors, which cause like dyspnea. And it has a carina, so at this point is known as the carina, and this is a downward and backward projection of the last tracheal cartilage. So yeah, which lies at the level of sternal angle as well, and it separates the opening of the right and the left bronchi. So the trachea chada, the inferior border of cricoid na sakigi start kigi so da gazipore, and the larynx continuation or the asal size to the da dole centimeter long da link ودا da وقدوال لري or the rings tasaburi the rings let me just the basic, yeah, these annular sorry, the rings, these one data hyaline cartilages way or the sakeda support k trachea collapse na support k so prevent it from collapse da collapse ni shidagit agi sare support k or munga previous lecture ki ham mention oka the aortic aneurysm lecture ki che aga da trachea ke deshi che da compress shi ka charta aneurysm peda shi da trachea aga aneurysm compress kawem shi ane de se urke kawem shi tan kawem shi and kadal da charta thyroid tumors yakam goiteri agam trachea affect kay compress kay او zaka nafas tangi sabab gilzi aga او daga region tamunga karina wayu daga area ta او the trachea chada da be further separate ki daga region chada da separate kay daga karina at the point of karina chada kana da separate kay trachea left main bronchus ta and then right main bronchus ta da separate kay. So yeah. Obal the picture the cadaver the so real human cadaver picture the, and as you can see the lungs the and then the trachea the delta the do the gut vessels like a aorta show like a pulmonary artery show are security the are dissect out kuri the region task the clear akarish and also heart lyric these in I thought it's very important to have a photo of a real cadaver when anatomy lessons are being carried out, just to give you a clear picture of how it would look in a human. I mean, of course, it does not look like that in a human being because it's a cadaver, but just like how it will appear in real life. So moving on to the bronchi. So if bronchi chida da plural da or bronchus chida aga singular da kamunga yo danata chida kana yo danata munga bronchus woy or dwadaneta munga bronchi woy. So bronchi is a plural word for bronchus, just to make it more clear. So right bronchus is this one. So right bronchus is usually shorter, wider, and it's more vertical than the left main bronchus, and therefore more foreign bodies that enter through the trachea are lodged or gets into this right bronchus or the inferior lobar bronchus, and it's divided into three lobar, or you can also call them secondary bronchi. So they're divided into superior, divided into middle, divided into inferior lobar bronchi, and it finally divides further into 10 segmental bronchi. So it further on divides until you reach bronchioles, and then you reach alveoli, and they also run under the arch of azygos vein. So this is a run under the arch of this azygos vein. And right bronchi cheda aga asal pa daga right bronchi da tumra puri da asal cheda da asal ke وړو کې د پس کې په شورت کې او ډیر بر لري ډیر پراخ ده او ډیر ورټیکل د نسبت زموږ د لیفت برونکای نه او دا هم دغه وجه ده چې کله فورن باډیز چې کنه هغه ایزیلی زموږ د تراکیا د لارې نه هغه ایزی زموږ رائټ برونکس ته لاره پیدا کوي نسبت د لیفت برونکس نه ځکه چې د دې لینث وړو کې ده او دا لک ډیر بر لري ډیر پراخ ده سو ایزیلی فورن باډیز دلته څه پیدا کوي لاره پیدا کوي اگزامپل during inspiration pneumonia چې موږ ورته هغه ډیر په رائټ غاړه کې common that because of this because of the anatomy of the right bronchus او دا همدغه نورم او دا اصل کې درې لوبز لري چې دغه area ته مونږه superior lobar bronchus وي به دغه ته مونږه middle lobar bronchus وي in دغه region چې دا inferior lobar bronchus دا او each one of them did further on دغه سي divide کیږي دغه سي further on divide کیږي نورم divide کیږي to bronchioles terminal bronchioles په respiratory and then eventually alveoli form کوي and دا چې دا the right bronchus دا اصل کې دغه position چې دا anatomy چې دا د azygos vein دا او د لاندې نه دا تیریږي دا د azygos vein arch دا دغه او دا right bronchus دا د لاندې نه دا اصل کې تیریږي په human body کې real anatomy of the human and then we have got also the left bronchus. The left bronchus, what it does is that it runs inferior-laterally to the arch of the aorta, as you can see here, and it's also divided into two lobar or secondary bronchi. So, unlike the right bronchus, the left bronchus it divides only into two lobar or secondary bronchi. So, it's the upper, so the superior, and also the inferior. Left lobar bronchus, and then finally it again further on divides into 8 or 10 segmental bronchi, and also the dilation of the lumen of the bronchi, they're controlled by sympathetic nerves, whereas constriction is controlled by the parasympathetic stimulation. So the left bronchus the inferior laterally the position دلته so the arch of aorta the arch of aorta لاندې دغه ستیریږي the inferior or like lateral position like lateral like the غاړې ته ډیر د position the bronchus and the left bronchus چې the two divisions لري دا unlike right چې درې شاخه لري درې branches لري دغه left دا two divisions لري so دغه شو and دغه شو on each one they obviously further on divide کیږي دغه as I mentioned دغه زی به دسه نورم divide کی and eventually دغه alveoli form کوي so دا چې ورته gas exchange surface مونږ وایو wow that was really bad writing okay so the alveoli eventually form کوي and yeah so the lumen the bronchi چې دی کنه دی further on دی control کیږي by sympathetic nerves and parasympathetic stimulation so sympathetic nerves چې دی کنه stimulation هغه dilate کوي the bronchial lumen یعنی هغه bronchus lumen چې دا هغه یعنی د څه غټ کوي dilate کوي په حساب د lumen او parasympathetic چې دا هغه constrict کوي یعنی ورکه کوي تنګي د bronchial bronchus lumen so it's sympathetic nerves it dilates the lumen ځکه چې هغه fight and flight response کې so that important that to have dilation of the bronchus during fight and flight response where the breathing is increased the heart rate is increased the blood pressure is increased so you need more air to enter more oxygen to enter and to ventilate the lungs okay so this is the bronchioles as you mentioned there is the trachea the zimunga bronchus the first generation mungwe am the further on khpal shakh basim further on branching kigi divide kigi eventually forming the alveoli and you can see that the generations that it goes through so bronchioles after the first 3 generations of bronchi however the airways become more narrow and these are called the bronchioles as you mentioned and these can stay open without the need for cartilage just give me a second. Okay. They can stay open without the need for cartilage. Air is conducted through the smaller and smaller bronchioles for about 15 to 20 generations, and these are collectively, they're known as the conducting bronchioles. So the last part of the conducting bronchioles, these are known that termed as the terminal bronchioles, and then after that, air gets to the respiratory bronchioles, which are unique because they have tiny outpoachings, as we said, outpoachings that bud off their wall, that comes out of their wall, and these outpoachings, these ones are known as the alveoli. And there are around 500 million of them within each lung. So our lungs, they consist of like 500 million of these alveoli. And the conducting portion, it's the airways, and it usually includes the nasal cavity, the nasopharynx, the larynx, tracheas, bronchi, bronchioles, up until terminal bronchioles. And then the respiratory portion, this is involved in the gas exchange. So involves the alveolar ducts, the alveolar sacs, and as mentioned, oxygen, carbon dioxide is being exchanged across this wall, this wall here, which is known as also the blood-air barrier, and it's basically wrapped in capillaries. So usually the زمونږ bronchioles چې دي دغه smaller section دي ته مونږ bronchioles وایو او دې ډېر دا چې کله bronchi ځانم دغسې نور هم ناروکۍ up to primary bronchi چې دی که نه هغه branching ورکوي secondary bronchioles ته بیا secondary bronchi branching کوي further on tertiary همدغسې به smaller bronchioles همدغسې به bronchioles کېږي او څومره چې small کېږي هماغومره د هغې تعداد هم ډېرېږي like به terminal bronchioles چې دی هغه involve like 6 to 16 generation یا دغمره پورې ځان دا نورم branching out کوي ان دا نورم ځانم دغسې شاخونه وباسي چې هغه as I said څومره چې دا څه کېږي وړوکی کېږي هماغومره تعداد هم ډېرېږي and هماغومره دا smaller and smaller and smaller کېږي and eventually دغه respiratory bronchioles at 17 to 19 generation دغلته reach کوي او دغه ځینه د respiratory bronchioles نه alveoli air sacs سکیږي هغه وځي او زموږ په lungs کې چې ده هغه تقریبا 1500 میلیونه alveoli مونږ لرو او د alveoli چې ده دا gas exchange so the surface the gas exchange د دې په across this gas exchange occur کیږي دغه section کې oxygen carbon dioxide exchange کیږي. And what more is left of this? Yeah, and then conducting region up to terminal bronchioles is conducting region, and then respiratory zone matlab gas is from it starts from the respiratory bronchioles, so it's like where the gas exchange surface starts. It's from the respiratory zone. So yeah, and then further on alveoli, a little bit more on alveoli. Obviously, as I mentioned, I'll keep mentioning that these concepts will be explained further in physiology lectures, but also today just to have introduction kind of to these topics, to these areas. So alveolar wall, it has a completely different structure from the bronchioles, and there are no cilia, no smooth muscles, so they're not composed of any cilia, smooth muscles, and instead these are composed, they're lined by the thin epithelial cells, which are also called the pneumocytes, and most are regular pneumocytes, so they're called type 1 pneumocytes, but some they also can find type 2 pneumocytes too, and type 2 pneumocyte, they have the ability to secrete a substance which is known as the surfactant, and this helps decrease the surface tension within the alveoli, and it helps the alveoli to be kept open. And type 2 pneumocyte can also transform into type 1 pneumocytes, so they can also help regenerate and replace the damaged cells. So alveoli چې دي هغوی structure چې دا هغه completely different than the bronchioles نه the respiratory bronchioles نه دي د cilia نه compose کوي دي د smooth muscles نه لري دي د walls د دې چې د دیوالونه د alveoli هغه دي they're lined by epithelial cells چې ورته pneumocytes مونږ وایو so د دوه رقم حجرات لري د خپل alveoli Yo the pneumocystis type 1 pneumocystis type 1 aga gas exchange ke involved the aga did abundant da, and then type 2 pneumocystis chidi how we your substance produce ke secret ke chimungorta surfactants we the substance chida aga surface tension the alveoli means ki the surface tension sakai reduce kay or help kay daga alveoli munga ilaprig di, so it helps the alveoli the outpoaching spogi daga like a tube one that structure to that, so daga surfactants kuma kay the alveoli am daga khpal da structure saki am daga regain ki basically, so it doesn't allow it to collapse. Yeah. And then you can see that these are the capillary network there. So through this gas exchange occurs through this capillary network that you can see here. The capillary network to the wrap alveoli, so the arterioles razi, and then arterioles the capillaries the batligi, so you know, so the they come from pulmonary artery. The pulmonary arteries from this further on to branching key. Eventually alveolar surface ke capillaries form ke gas exchange ke important da. And then moving on to lungs. So we have got the right lung. So the right lung, it's actually large and heavier than the left lung, which is shorter in size, and it's also more wider because of the higher right dome of the diaphragm. So because of the structure of the diaphragm, or the position of the diaphragm, that gives both of them a certain structure, and also because of the inclination of the heart towards the left. And the right one, as you can see, it's divided into upper, middle, and lower lobes by the oblique fissure and also by the horizontal fissure. We also in a previous slide mungo ile bronchus chida zamunga right bronchus aga three lobes three lobes ki divide shwi dem daga similarly zamunga right lungam chida aga da three divide shwi three lobes ki divide shwi, so daga tamunga upper lobe with daga area chida the middle lobe da or daga area chida da in sada the lower lobe da. أو the oblique fissure كده ده separate كده ده fissure ده line شجوري ده ديتا fissure ويدا so يدلتا clear مرخ كاري ده separate كي lower from middle, and then you have also got the horizontal line كده the separate line that did the horizontal fissure, no sorry the oblique fissure as you can see, and that's the horizontal fissure that separate key from lower lung, separate key upper lung the lower lung na. And usually right lung chida aga asil ke gadda nisbat the left lung na, or da like drundam da or zumung left lung chida aga short da precise ke, and or like paraha one that, as you can see more clear in this picture here. And the left lung is divided into upper lobes and also lower lobes by only oblique fissure. And yeah, and has also two lobar bronchi and segmental 8 to 10 segmental bronchi as we talked about. So the zamung left lung chida da khali dwa lobe lari, so da lari upper lobe lari and then lower lobe lari, in khali divide ki yo fissure lari chida divide ki, which is called the oblique fissure. And then you have got the yeah, so this is like lungs from a cadaver da the cadaver lung da che degal taklil ikhkari three loba separately, and dal taklil ikhkari only two lobes أول شيء da إذا كتاسو lungs أقول دا دوشينا دا clearly differentiate كي left lung the right lung na أول دا obviously دا lobes دي chida right wala three lobalari or the left wala chida da dwa lobalari obal chida dagalta daga area ki daga area tamunga lingula which dalta gori da left lung ki dita munga lingula or da like more specific da zamung left lung da, so daga area chida so spot ke no you will know that it's a left lung. So this is the second way to recognize them. And this is okay. Now this is the medial side of the lung. That's the medial side of the lung, and we're going to talk about like a very important structure, which is the hilum of the lung. So another important feature, as mentioned, of each lung is the root of the lung, which is called the hilum, and this is this whole thing is called the hilum, and this is roughly triangular area which is located on the medial surface of the organs, and they mark the point at which many structures enters and leaves the lung. So it acts as the only point of attachment between the lung and also between the other thoracic structures. So while both hila, so if it's plural, it's known as hila, contain the same general structures, there are subtle differences in how these structures are arranged. So so hila chida kana the area the roughly triangular shape chida daga munga tool hilum way the whole thing the tool the hilum the medial side ki the lung or through the area the attachment point the lung or the intrathoracic structures means ki. So the example ka pulmonary arteries ka the sanarazi the heart narazi aga kala langta through dagalta attachment lari. So pulmonary veins delta attachment lari. Example, the right lung the or pulmonary arteries delta attachment lari, or the bronchi chide dagalta attachment lari. So kala chida intrathoracic structures chidi kana the point of attachment the structures chida to lungs aga daga areas the aga dana pada hilum kida the medial side da or the pulmonary ligament da. So from here data munga pulmonary ligament way. So the arrangement to the hilum kida structures arranged per right lung different but the left lung. So the left lung kida differently arranged the or per right lung kida differently arranged the. So your position your kamnada. So yeah, they're just arranged differently. So as I mentioned, this is the attachment site. You can see it here for the pulmonary artery. And this is the attachment site for the pulmonary veins. The reason the pulmonary artery is blue, blue color, just to highlight the fact that pulmonary arteries they contain deoxygenated blood, and the pulmonary veins contain the oxygenated one, and that's why they're being highlighted in these colors, these specific colors. And this is the attachment site for the bronchus, the main bronchus, and similarly it's here as well. And also the medial side of the lung, as you can see, they also have contain grooves for various structures. Example, the left lung, it contains grooves for aortic arch. It contains groove for like descending aorta, left subclavian artery. The right side has also groove for superior vena cava, arch of azygos vein, or esophagus. So depression daga grooves like these ones, these ones, and these ones. They do like chap punadi chidaga. At this point, the grooves for like structures structures like the like the superior vena cava, the esophagus, the azygos veins, the chapti basically. And so this is like the arch of aorta. The arch of aorta chida aga this ikhbal chap daga sigdi, like from here. It's not very important, but yeah. And this is this is also like a picture of cadavers, a real picture of cadavers. So this is the thorax, open thorax, the qalb, the lungs, the right lungs, the left lung, the heart area, the aorta, so it's just a real picture. This is like they have removed the sternum, they removed the rib cage to make this area more visible. So I thought it's important that you grab the concept of it and you know how it looks in real life. And daga hilum so again po your cadaver kida hilum section but daga sikhkari asal ke pulmonary arteries dalta pulmonary veins dagalta be bronchi and this is another cadaver photo of the lung, so real lung photo. This is how they look actually. And then moving on to the pleura. So pleura, it is It's a thin serous membrane that consists of parietal pleura, as you can see, like the outer layer. This area is known as the parietal pleura, the visceral pleura, and in between is the pleural cavity. And its role is to obviously protect and cushion the lungs. And the function of this pleura, what it does, that it allows for like optimal or maximum expansion of the lungs and during breathing, and also contraction of the lung during breathing. So as I mentioned, the pleural fluid, it acts as a lubricant, so allowing the parietal and visceral pleura to glide over each other friction-free. So this fluid is produced by the pleural layers themselves. So we have got the parietal pleura, which lines the inner surface of the thoracic wall, and the mediastinum, and has a costal, diaphragmatic, mediastinal, or cervical parts, which are not very necessary to know. And the parietal pleura is very sensitive to pain, and it's supplied by the intercostal nerves and the phrenic nerves. Then you have got here at this point the visceral pleura, and it's the inner layer, intimately invests the lungs, or it dips into all of the fissures, and it's insensitive. It's not sensitive, so insensitive to pain, but however, it's sensitive to stretch. And pleural cavity is in between. As you can see, in between is the pleural cavity, and it's a potential space between the parietal and the visceral pleura, and it contains a film of fluid that lubricates the surface of the pleura and also facilitates the movement of the lungs. So the pleura chida da yo thin dirta da tall hole the area چې د دې ته موږ pleura وایو او دا یو thin serous membrane ده چې زموږ lung سره کومک کوي او هغه cushion کوي او دا consist کوي دا زموږ pleura چې دا هغه consist کوي of parietal pleura چې دغه layer ده دا parietal ده دا pleural cavity ده چې دلته fluid run کیږي pleural fluid دغه run کیږي and then دا visceral pleura ده دا innermost چې دا visceral pleura ده and the parietal pleura چې دا هغه ډېر اساس ده کله درد ته چې دا pain ته هغه ډېر اساس ده and هغه innervate کیږي by intercostal nerves چې دي هغه او phrenic nerves چې دي هغه parietal pleura innervate کوي او visceral pleura چې دا کنه دا اساس دا ډېر اساس د څه د کشوالي ته لنګ چې کله کش کیږي هغې ته ډېر اساس ده او لیکن not for pain ته دومره اساس نه ده like sensitive نه ده and pleural cavity کې چې موږ دلته pleural fluid ده او دا pleural fluid چې دا هغه کومک کوي چې زموږ like زموږ lung lubricate pleural cavity چې د هغه زموږ lung lubricate کوي سو کومک کوي چې زموږ lung like lubricate شي او څه شي easily د pleura چې نه د parietal and visceral pleura منځ کې چې friction هغه friction یعنی زیږوالی چې کله د parietal pleura منځ کې او دغه visceral pleura منځ کې friction دغه fluid چې دلته رن کېږي هغه friction یعنی هغه زیږوالی prevent کوي یعنی هغه دا help کوي چې دغه parietal and visceral pleura ډېر په اسانۍ طریقه سره ډېر په اسانۍ سره داسې څوکې ګلایډ وکړي یعنې خویوالی پرې پیدا کوي دا دلته and obviously دا structure دا کومک کوي breathing movement کې دا ډېر کومک کوي and it's involved in the breathing movement so the structure and also yeah. That's all from this. Let me see if there's more to explain here. Okay. So vasculature of the lung. With the so pulmonary arteries enter the lung at the hilar point, as you mentioned earlier. The hilar point ki aga pulmonary arteries chi dikana lung ta enter kigi, and further divisions follow each bronchial division, as you can see here, and eventually divide into pulmonary arterioles that form capillary plexus over the alveoli, as we mentioned before. So the pulmonary arteries chi da the heart naturally aga the hilar the larina attach kigi zumunga lungs da at the hilar point, or they do further divide key, that's as you can see the pulmonary artery the further lung key branch out key, so no further divide key يعني each section the each the أغخبلا specific numeri like superior segment show, like anteromedial segment show, like posterior basal segment show, so each branch the pulmonary artery أغخبلا yo specific numeri, which I don't think is really important. As you can see here أغا بدغي ترتيب باندي دبا سنجا تزمونغا bronchi سكيجي branch out كي يعني الشاخ وركي مدغا سيزمونغا pulmonary such دا artery شدي أغا مدغا سي نورزان مدغا سي further on branch out كي and eventually كده the pulmonary artery مدغا سي نورا مدغا سي divide كي مدغا سي الشاخ وركي I don't know who's writing here. Yeah, and eventually the pulmonary artery they further on eventually divide into arterioles form be capillaries form so at this point, as you can see at this point the capillaries form the zamunga alveoli wrap and zamunga gas exchange surface form Can someone please stop writing? And then we have got the so this is just to show you a picture, like overall picture of how it would look and how it would the pulmonary arteries and the pulmonary veins, how they'll branch out inside the lungs. Okay, so we have got the bronchial arteries. The bronchial arteries, these supply blood to airways down to the level of the terminal bronchioles, visceral pleura, intrapulmonary blood vessel walls, and lymphatics. And the right bronchial artery arises from the third and the fourth intercostal artery, and the left bronchial artery arises directly from the thoracic aorta. And usually there's only one artery for the right side and two for the left lung. And then you have also got the bronchial veins. They receive blood from the bronchi, empty into the azygos vein on the right side. So on the right side, they empty into the azygos vein, whereas on the left side, they empty into the accessory hemiazygos vein or the superior intercostal vein on the left side. And this is just to demonstrate the arteries that supply the intercostal muscles that we spoke about, and also the nerves that supply this area, and the vessels that supply this, so the nerve that innervate this area, or the vessel that supply this area. So bronchial arteries شدي أغوي سكي supply كي terminal bronchioles تا vena visceral pleura تا intrapulmonary blood vessels تا like intrapulmonary arteries تا أغوي blood supply كي lymphatics تا زمونغا أو right artery كده أغا the intercostal artery دا أو the right bronchial artery كده أغا branch out كي the intercostal سنة the intercostal artery na branch out كي ده غسي like this. And زمونغا left bronchial artery كده أغا directly زمونغ the thoracic aorta na branch out كي. So that thoracic aorta شو that pole, and the غنا directly the left غارة bronchial artery the left غارة كده أغا direct branching the thoracic aorta نرازي, whereas the خي غارة كده أغا branching كده أغا through intercostal artery نرازي. And this is the venous system. Our venous system do receive key blood from bronchi or the empty key azygos vein the khigarina, and then hemiazygos vein like that, and this area the chabgarina. And the nerve supply and blood supply, the nerve innervation, the blood supply to intercostal muscles, as you can see here. And this is the last photo, and this is just to show how the blood is supplied through the aorta, from the aorta to these to intercostals, into the ribs, and how the innervation is carried out. And this is also for the venous system. This is for the blood, the arterial system, and this is something that you can just read in your own time. And I think that's all from me. Thank you very much for listening. And yeah, that's all for today's lecture. So just stop the recording.